On June 13, 1983, 17-year-old Cindy Paulson flagged down a passing motorist on Anchorage's 6th Avenue. She was handcuffed, terrified, and had just escaped from a nightmare that would have ended with her death in the Alaskan wilderness. The man who had abducted her at gunpoint seemed so ordinary, a soft-spoken baker who lived with his wife and children in a quiet suburb. But Robert Hansen had a secret life that turned Alaska's vast wilderness into his personal hunting ground, where women became prey in the most literal sense. For over a decade, Hansen had been perfecting a horrific ritual. He would abduct women, fly them to remote locations in his private plane, strip them naked, and release them into the wilderness. Then he would hunt them down with a high-powered rifle, just like the wild game he had been tracking since childhood. Intent. That's what separates accident from murder, passion from premeditation, justice from revenge. It is not the act itself, but the intent behind it that makes it a crime. Today on Deadly Intent, we're examining a case that reveals how childhood humiliation and adult rejection can metastasize into something monstrous. A successful businessman, a devoted family man, a pillar of his community, who methodically stalked and murdered vulnerable women while maintaining the perfect facade. The question that haunts everyone who studied this case isn't just what he did, but how a man could compartmentalize such evil while living an otherwise unremarkable life. What transforms hurt into homicide? And how does a victim become a predator? I'm Carman, and if you know me from Freaky Folklore or Destination Terror, you know I've spent years exploring the dark corners of human imagination. But I've learned that the most terrifying monsters aren't hiding in folklore. They're sometimes hiding behind the most ordinary facades. Welcome back to Deadly Intent, where we examine the criminal cases that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. Today's case takes us to Alaska in the 1970s and 80s, where the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline brought thousands of workers and the predators who followed them. We're looking at a crime spree so calculating and brutal that it helped establish modern criminal profiling techniques. The case of Robert Hansen forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how we view masculinity, how we define success, and what happens when a person's deepest psychological wounds drive them to inflict unimaginable suffering on others. Because understanding the intent behind Hansen's actions, that methodical transformation of women from human beings into quarry, that's the key to understanding how a neighborhood baker became one of America's most prolific serial killers. Esterville, Iowa, February 15, 1939. Robert Christian Hansen was born into what appeared to be a stable, hardworking family. His father, Christian Hansen, was a Danish immigrant who owned and operated the local bakery. His mother, Edna, was an American-born woman who worked alongside her husband in building their small business. From the outside, the Hansen family embodied the American dream, immigrants who had found success through hard work and determination. But inside that bakery, young Robert was learning lessons that would shape the rest of his life. Christian Hansen was a strict disciplinarian who demanded perfection from his eldest son. Robert was expected to work long hours in the bakery from an early age, sometimes starting at 4 a.m. before school to help prepare the day's bread. His father was especially hard on him when he made mistakes, and Robert quickly learned that failure brought swift punishment. But it wasn't just his father's demands that made Robert's childhood difficult. He was born with a severe stutter that made him the target of relentless bullying at school. Combined with persistent acne and an awkward, gangly build, Robert became the classic victim, the kid other children picked on without consequence. These early experiences of powerlessness and humiliation would prove crucial to understanding Robert's later crimes. Child psychologists now recognize that serial killers often share certain childhood experiences, feelings of powerlessness, humiliation by peers, and difficulty forming healthy relationships. Robert Hansen exhibited all of these warning signs. By age 10, Robert was already displaying the behavior triad that criminologists call the McDonald triad: persistent bedwetting past the normal age, cruelty to animals, and fire setting. He would torture and kill neighborhood cats, sometimes spending hours in elaborate rituals of cruelty that seemed to give him a sense of control he couldn't find anywhere else in his life. But there was one place where Robert found both escape and empowerment: the wilderness around Esterville. When he wasn't working in the bakery or enduring torment at school, Robert would disappear into the woods with his rifle. Here, finally, he could be the predator instead of the prey. Robert became an exceptional marksman and tracker. Hunting wasn't just a hobby for him, it was a source of identity and self-worth. In the woods, he was competent, powerful, in control. The animals couldn't mock his stutter or reject him socially. They could only run, hide, or die. This pattern would define Robert's entire life, finding ways to exert power and control over others to compensate for the powerlessness he felt in social situations. What started with animals would eventually evolve into something far more sinister. In 1957, at age 18, Robert graduated from high school in a class of only 31 students. Tellingly, his name was misspelled in the yearbook, a final indignity from his high school years. That same year, he joined the Army Reserves, where he served 1 weekend a month while continuing to work at the family bakery. After high school, Robert's life followed a pattern of small crimes and social failures. In 1960, consumed by resentment toward his community, he convinced a teenage bakery employee to help him burn down the local school bus garage. When the teenager confessed, Robert was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He served only 20 months, but the experience was transformative in the worst possible way. Prison psychiatrists diagnosed him with an infantile personality and noted his antisocial tendencies, but their recommendations for treatment were ignored. Robert was released into the community more bitter and resentful than ever. The intent behind Robert Hansen's early crimes reveals a crucial pattern that would escalate throughout his life. The arson wasn't random vandalism. It was targeted revenge against an institution that represented his social humiliation. The school bus garage served children who had tormented him, and destroying it gave him a sense of power and payback. This distinction is critical for understanding how Hansen's criminal psychology developed. He wasn't acting impulsively or out of passion. Even as a young man, his crimes were calculated acts designed to restore his sense of control and superiority. This methodical approach to violence, this ability to plan and execute revenge, would become the hallmark of his later murders. Criminal psychologists call this instrumental violence, violence used as a tool to achieve a psychological goal, rather than violence driven by sudden emotion. For Hansen, each act of violence served to repair his damaged sense of masculinity and control. The more powerless he felt in legitimate social situations, the more elaborate his violent fantasies became. 1963. After his release from prison, Robert Hansen seemed to turn his life around. He married a local woman and appeared to be settling into respectability. But the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce within a few years. In 1967, at age 28, Robert made a decision that would prove fateful for countless victims. He moved to Anchorage, Alaska, with his second wife, Darla. Alaska in the late 1960s was experiencing rapid growth, and there were opportunities for someone willing to work hard and start over. Robert opened Hansen's Bakery in Anchorage, and by all outward appearances, he was a success story. The bakery became popular with locals. Robert and Darla had 2 children, and they lived in a modest but comfortable home in a quiet suburb. Robert even indulged his passion for hunting. setting several local records for trophy animals taken with a bow. But Alaska offered Robert something else that Iowa never could: vast expanses of wilderness, accessible only by private plane. In 1973, Robert purchased a Piper Super Cub and began flying regularly into the remote areas around Anchorage. He told everyone it was for hunting, and in a sense, that was exactly what it was for. The early 1970s were a transformative time for Alaska. Construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline brought thousands of workers to the state, along with all the businesses that catered to men with good wages and little to do in their spare time. Strip clubs, massage parlors, and prostitution flourished in Anchorage's red light district. For women working in this economy, many of them young, transient, and vulnerable, Alaska could be a dangerous place. They often worked without protection, moved frequently, and had little contact with family or friends who might notice if they disappeared. They were, in short, perfect victims for a predator who had learned to target the powerless. Robert Hansen had learned from his earlier arrests. His attempts to assault middle-class women in the early 1970s had resulted in charges and legal trouble, but he discovered that when sex workers or exotic dancers complained about violent clients, police often didn't take their reports seriously. The victims weren't considered credible, and their lifestyle made them easy targets for victim blaming. This was the environment that allowed Hansen to operate with impunity for over a decade. Between 1973 and 1983, he refined a horrific system that turned his hunting skills into a method of human predation. Hansen's modus operandi was coldly methodical. He would cruise Anchorage's red light district, approaching women who worked as prostitutes or exotic dancers. He would negotiate for sex, then drive them to secluded locations, where he would pull a gun and abduct them. Most victims were taken to his home, where he kept a torture chamber in the basement. He would bind, rape, and torture them while his wife and children slept upstairs. Then came the decision that separated life from death. Hansen claimed that women who submitted completely to his sexual fantasies would be returned to Anchorage alive. Those who resisted faced a far worse fate. The resistant victims were loaded into Hansen's plane and flown to remote locations in the Alaskan wilderness. There, he would strip them naked and set them free with a chilling promise. He would give them a head start, but then he would come hunting for them with his rifle and knife. What followed was the ultimate expression of Hansen's lifelong need for power and control. The women, naked and terrified in the harsh Alaskan wilderness, became prey in the most literal sense. Hansen would track them using skills he had honed since childhood, eventually cornering them and shooting them dead. Let me tell you about two cases that illustrate the full horror of Hansen's methodology. In the summer of 1982, 23-year-old Sherry Morrow was working as an exotic dancer in Anchorage when Hansen approached her. Sherry had dreams of saving money to move to California and start a new life. Instead, she became one of Hansen's most documented victims. After abducting Sherry at gunpoint, Hansen took her to his home, where he kept her chained in his basement for hours, subjecting her to sexual assault and torture. He told her in detail what he planned to do, how he would fly her to the wilderness, release her naked, and then hunt her down like an animal. When Hansen flew Sherry to a remote area near the Nick River, he gave her what he called a sporting chance. He stripped her completely naked and told her she had a 15-minute head start before he would begin tracking her. Sherry ran barefoot through the dense Alaskan underbrush, thorns tearing at her skin, fighting hypothermia as temperatures dropped. Hansen tracked her for over an hour, following her trail through the wilderness like he was pursuing wounded game. When he finally cornered her against a riverbank, Sherry was exhausted, bleeding, and hypothermic. Hansen shot her once in the back with his .223 Ruger Mini 14 rifle, then approached and fired a second shot into her head to ensure she was dead. He buried her body in a shallow grave, took her jewelry as a trophy, and marked the location on his aviation map with a small X. To Hansen, it was just another successful hunt. Even more disturbing was the case of 17-year-old Paula Golding, who disappeared in April 1983, just months before Hansen's capture. Paula was a runaway who had turned to prostitution to survive on Anchorage's streets. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, and weighed less than 100 pounds. Hansen later confessed that Paula fought him from the moment of her abduction. During the sexual assault in his basement, she repeatedly tried to escape and refused to submit to his demands. This resistance sealed her fate in Hansen's mind. She would become prey in his most elaborate hunt yet. Hansen flew Paula to an area near Horseshoe Lake, more than 30 miles from Anchorage. But this time, he added a sadistic twist. Instead of immediately releasing her, he forced her to spend the night naked and bound in the freezing wilderness, telling her that the hunt would begin at dawn. The next morning, Hansen untied Paula and told her she had 30 minutes to run before he would begin tracking her. What followed was a 6-hour ordeal through some of Alaska's most unforgiving terrain. Paula, naked and barefoot, tried to evade capture while dealing with sub-freezing temperatures, rough terrain, and the psychological terror of knowing that a man with a high-powered rifle was methodically tracking her. Hansen later told investigators that he particularly enjoyed this hunt because Paula was clever and managed to evade him for longer than most victims. He described finding her tracks in mud, following broken branches where she had passed, and the satisfaction of slowly closing the distance between them. When he finally cornered Paula in a ravine, she was barely conscious from hypothermia and exhaustion. Hansen shot her multiple times, taking particular care to ensure she suffered before dying. He then carved his initials into a nearby tree to mark what he considered one of his most successful hunts. Paula's body wasn't found until after Hansen's confession led investigators to the site. Her remains showed evidence of multiple gunshot wounds and defensive injuries, indicating she had fought for her life until the very end. After killing his victims, Hansen would take jewelry or other small items as trophies. He would bury the bodies in remote locations, carefully marking each gravesite on an aviation map that he kept hidden in his bedroom. By 1983, that map would contain 24 X marks, representing what investigators believe were burial sites of his victims. But Hansen's methodical nature extended beyond the murders themselves. He maintained detailed records of his flights, kept meticulous hunting logs, and even photographed some of his victims. This wasn't a man killing in a fit of rage. This was a man who had turned murder into a hobby, complete with documentation and memorabilia. The intent behind Hansen's evolved methodology reveals the sophisticated psychology of an organized serial killer. Every aspect of his crimes served multiple psychological functions. The initial abduction satisfied his need to exert power over women, who represented the type who had rejected him in high school and young adulthood. The torture and sexual assault allowed him to live out fantasies of complete domination. But it was the hunting phase that truly satisfied his deepest psychological needs. In the wilderness, Hansen wasn't just killing his victims. He was transforming them from human beings with agency into animals to be tracked and killed. This dehumanization was crucial to his psychological satisfaction. The women who had once represented his social inadequacy were literally reduced to the level of prey animals. Criminal psychologist Robert Hare, who developed the psychopathy checklist, would later identify Hansen as a textbook example of a psychopathic killer. He exhibited superficial charm, grandiosity, lack of remorse, and the ability to compartmentalize his crimes while maintaining a normal family and business life. But what made Hansen especially dangerous was his patience and methodical approach. Unlike disorganized killers who act impulsively, Hansen could wait months between murders, carefully selecting victims and planning each phase of his crimes. This patience allowed him to operate for over a decade while maintaining his cover as a respectable businessman. June 13, 1983. It was a warm evening in Anchorage when 17-year-old Cindy Paulson agreed to get into Robert Hansen's car. She was working as a prostitute, trying to survive on her own after aging out of the foster care system. Hansen had approached her with what seemed like a straightforward transaction, but within minutes, Hansen had pulled a .357 Magnum and ordered Cindy into his car. He drove her to his house on Old Harbor Road, where he chained her up in his basement and sexually assaulted her for hours. Then he told her they were going for a plane ride. Cindy Paulson had no way of knowing that she was about to become part of a ritual that had already claimed the lives of at least 16 other women. Hansen loaded her into his car and drove to Merrill Field, where his Piper Super Cub was waiting. He told her he was going to fly her into the wilderness, let her go, and then hunt her down and kill her, just like he had done to so many others. But Cindy Paulson was a survivor. When Hansen left her alone in the car while he loaded supplies into his plane, she saw her chance and ran. She flagged down a passing motorist who drove her to safety and called police. For the first time in over a decade, one of Hansen's victims had survived to tell her story. But convincing police to believe her wouldn't be easy. When Anchorage police arrived to take Cindy's statement, they found a frightened teenager with a criminal record, trying to convince them that a respected businessman was a serial killer. Hansen had an alibi, 2 friends who swore he had been with them the night of the assault. His lawyer portrayed Cindy as an opportunistic prostitute, trying to extort money from an innocent client. The case might have ended there, with Cindy's word against that of a pillar of the community, but several factors worked in her favor. First, she was able to provide detailed descriptions of Hansen's house, his basement, and even his airplane, details that proved accurate when investigators checked them. Second, other bodies had been turning up around Anchorage, and police were starting to see patterns. Most importantly, the FBI had recently begun developing sophisticated criminal profiling techniques, and Hansen's case would become one of their early successes. FBI profiler John Douglas was brought in to analyze the series of murders around Anchorage. Working with the limited information available, Douglas created a psychological profile of the killer that was remarkably accurate. The killer, Douglas predicted, would be a white male in his 40s with a history of rejection by women. He would have low self-esteem, compensated by excessive pride and some skill or accomplishment. He would be an experienced outdoorsman and hunter. He would live locally and have extensive knowledge of the wilderness areas where bodies were being found. He would keep souvenirs of his crimes and would have some speech impediment or physical abnormality that had made him feel inferior. Most tellingly, Douglas predicted that the killer would stutter. When investigators compared Douglas's profile to Hansen, the match was nearly perfect. Hansen was 44 years old, had a documented history of problems with women, was known as an expert hunter and pilot, and had a pronounced stutter that became worse when he was stressed. But the breakthrough came when Hansen's alibi fell apart. The 2 friends who had initially supported his story admitted they had lied to protect him. With his alibi destroyed and mounting evidence against him, investigators obtained search warrants for Hansen's home and airplane. What they found confirmed their worst fears. In Hansen's basement, they discovered the torture chamber that Cindy Paulson had described, complete with chains, weapons, and other implements of torture. In his bedroom, hidden in the headboard of his bed, they found the aviation map marked with 24X symbols representing burial sites. Most damning of all, they found Hansen's collection of trophies, jewelry, identification cards, and personal items taken from his victims. Each item represented a life cut short, a family left wondering what had happened to their daughter, sister, or friend. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Hansen agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Over the course of several interviews, he led police to burial sites throughout the Anchorage area and provided details about his crimes that only the killer could have known. Hansen confessed to murdering 17 women and raping at least 30 others over more than a decade. He described his methodology with chilling detachment, explaining how he had refined his techniques over the years to avoid detection. The intent revealed in Hansen's confessions shows the full evolution of his criminal psychology. What had begun as petty revenge crimes had metastasized into a systematic campaign of terror against an entire class of victims. Hansen told investigators that he specifically targeted prostitutes and exotic dancers because he knew their disappearances would be less likely to trigger intensive police investigations. This calculated victim selection demonstrates the cold pragmatism that characterized all of his crimes. But Hansen's explanations also revealed the deeper psychological drivers behind his violence. He spoke about the women he killed with obvious contempt, describing them as less than human, as deserving of their fate. This dehumanization wasn't just a byproduct of his crimes. It was essential to his ability to commit them. Perhaps most chilling was Hansen's matter-of-fact description of the hunting phase of his crimes. He spoke about tracking his victims through the wilderness with the same tone he might use to describe hunting elk or moose. The women weren't people to him. They were animals to be killed for sport. This complete psychological transformation of victims from humans to objects is what allowed Hansen to maintain his double life for so long. To his family, customers, and community, he was Robert the Baker, the family man, the local hunting expert. To his victims, he was something far more terrifying, a predator who had found the perfect hunting ground. On February 27, 1984, Robert Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge who sentenced him called him the most dangerous psychopath I have ever dealt with, and predicted that he would be a danger to women as long as he lived. Hansen was initially imprisoned at the United States Penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, before being transferred back to Alaska. He spent most of his sentences at Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward, where he died on August 21, 2014, at the age of 75. But Hansen's capture and conviction was about more than just stopping one killer. His case became a landmark in the development of criminal profiling and helped establish the FBI's Behavior Analysis Unit as a crucial tool in investigating serial crimes. The accuracy of John Douglas's profile, especially his prediction that the killer would stutter, demonstrated that behavioral science could be an invaluable investigative tool. Law enforcement agencies around the country began incorporating profiling techniques into their investigations of similar crimes. Hansen's case also highlighted the vulnerability of certain populations to predatory crime. The women he targeted were often young, economically desperate, and socially marginalized. Their disappearances didn't trigger the same intensive investigation that might have followed if middle-class victims had been targeted. This reality forced law enforcement to confront uncomfortable questions about whose lives were considered worth protecting and investigating. Hansen's ability to operate for over a decade was partly due to societal attitudes that devalued the lives of the women he chose as victims. Today, law enforcement agencies are better trained to recognize the signs of serial predation and to investigate all missing person cases with equal intensity, regardless of the victim's lifestyle or background. Hansen's case served as a tragic lesson in the importance of taking all victims seriously. The families of Hansen's victims have worked to ensure their loved ones are remembered as more than just statistics. Women like Sherry Morrow, Paula Golding, and Andrea Altieri were daughters, sisters, and friends who deserve better than the fate that befell them. Perhaps most remarkably, some of Hansen's victims remained unidentified for decades. In 2021, genetic genealogy techniques finally allowed investigators to identify one victim who had been known for 37 years only as Horseshoe Harriet. She was Robin Pelkey, a 19-year-old, originally from Colorado. who had come to Alaska seeking a new life. Robin's identification brought closure to her family and demonstrated how new technologies could solve even decades-old cases. It also served as a reminder that behind every criminal case are real people whose lives were cut short by violence. The ultimate intent behind Robert Hansen's crimes reveals the terrifying potential for ordinary evil. Hansen wasn't driven by mental illness or obvious pathology. He was driven by a toxic combination of entitlement, resentment, and carefully cultivated hatred. His crimes represent the extreme end of what psychologists call malignant narcissism, a personality disorder characterized by grandiosity, lack of empathy, and a willingness to exploit others for personal satisfaction. Hansen's need for control and domination wasn't satisfied by success in business or hunting accomplishments. It required the complete domination and destruction of other human beings. What makes Hansen's case especially disturbing is how normal he appeared to those who knew him. He maintained friendships, raised children, ran a successful business, and participated in community activities. This ability to compartmentalize his crimes while maintaining a normal facade challenges our assumptions about how evil manifests in the world. The intent behind Hansen's crimes wasn't insanity. It was the calculated pursuit of psychological satisfaction through the exercise of ultimate power over others. He created a system that allowed him to live out his deepest violent fantasies while maintaining the perfect cover of respectability. Understanding this intent is crucial for recognizing similar predators. They don't necessarily look like the monsters we imagine. They often look like our neighbors, our colleagues, our community leaders. The capacity for evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. The case of Robert Hansen forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about predation, power, and the vulnerability of marginalized populations. His story isn't just about one man's descent into evil. It's about how society's attitudes and assumptions can enable monsters to operate in plain sight. Hansen's victims deserve to be remembered, not as statistics or case studies, but as individuals who had hopes, dreams, and people who loved them. Their deaths led to important advances in criminal investigation and victim protection. But that progress came at a terrible cost. For over a decade, Robert Hansen turned Alaska's wilderness into a hunting ground, where women became prey. His methodical approach to murder, his ability to maintain a double life, and his cold, psychological manipulation of victims made him one of the most dangerous predators in American criminal history. But in the end, it was the courage of one survivor, 17-year-old Cindy Paulson, that brought this reign of terror to an end. Her bravery in coming forward and insisting that police take her seriously saved countless future victims and helped establish new standards for investigating crimes against vulnerable populations. Today, law enforcement agencies use the lessons learned from the Hansen case to better identify and capture serial predators. The techniques developed by FBI profilers like John Douglas continue to evolve and improve, helping to solve cases that might once have gone unsolved. The intent behind Robert Hansen's crimes reveals the darkest possibilities of human nature, the transformation of hurt into hatred, rejection into revenge, and powerlessness into predation. But it also demonstrates the power of courage, persistence, and the refusal to let evil triumph unchallenged. For the families of Hansen's victims, justice may never feel complete, but their loved ones' stories continue to protect others by helping us understand how predators operate and how we can better defend against them. In remembering their lives and their losses, we honor their memory and work to prevent similar tragedies. The butcher-baker may be gone, but the lessons of his crimes remain. In understanding his intent, we better understand the monsters that hide among us and how to stop them before they can harm others. This has been Deadly Intent. I'm Carman. Remember, it's not the act itself, but the intent behind it that makes it a crime.